Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Your Pet Detective Show. I'm your host, Angel Nieves, and we have something very, very special to talk about today. Um, it's, um, it's contagious on animals. It's two viruses and a bacteria, which is the triple E, the um, strep virus, and strep zoo, and the other one is the bird flu on cats. I have a very special guest, but before I do, I just want to mention everybody. What I do is I do private investigations, and I'm a pet investigator. That's my specialty, and it's because a lot of pets are being missing. So I even wrote a little thin book for people who understand how to protect their pets. It's right here. You could get it on Amazon. Do you know where your pets are? And it has to do with how to protect your pets, what to do when you lose your pets, what you do when you find somebody else's pet, you don't keep it. And that's the most important, because if we follow those rules and we follow and protect our animals and do not leave it unattended, you will knock down the lost and stolen dogs could be to 90%. So please get the book. It's on Amazon. You know where your pets are. Today's topic, like I said, is going to be on bacteria and viruses that's contagious. It's been around for a while, but it's becoming more contagious because we leave our pets outside. I got a special guest. Her name is Dr. Catherine Reed. She's she's up in the West Coast. She earned a doctorate degree in veteran medicine from the University of Wisconsin and a German PhD equivalent biomedical technology from the University of Berlin. He works in the West Coast and also in the East Coast in New York. She does mainly do now is emergencies, and she's very special. So, hello.
Hi. How's it going?
How you doing?
Good.
Let me ask you one thing. I'm trying to get this off. There we go. Um, Explain more about yourself, because I read something and it was words that I did not understand at all. So I'm not going to say something I do not understand. I don't mess it up.
So, short version is I'm a veterinarian. I have special training in infectious diseases, mostly viruses. I have a biomedical technology degree, is where I got most of that training. I started my career in elephants and rhinos, studying diseases that impacted those species as well as our conservation efforts. And as I came back stateside, started having kids and not being able to travel all over the world, I have shifted back to my first love, which was emergency medicine and critical care.
You're a gymnast.
And I'm a gymnast.
I throw
Just
that
left
in.
the gymnastics
Don't
camp.
stop.
Yeah, that was amazing.
That's great. That's great news. The thing is now is we have three things that people are afraid of, which is contagious, which is the strep zoo, the bird flu, and the EE virus. So, I mean, people are more afraid of because now they're getting contagious with the pets. So let's start off from the beginning. Let's start off from each one. Let's start off with the Eastern Equine.
So I will say none of these are new viruses slash bacteria, new components. EEHV has been around since 1800s. I think it was first discovered in Massachusetts. It is technically a vector-borne disease. So yes, it can infect horses. Most people do not show symptoms, even if they're positive for having the virus in their system. We think they're the ones that are susceptible either have genetic predisposition or they have immune suppression. There's typically only about 6 cases a year. I think we're seeing a rise in EEHV more because of the mosquito population. We can blame that on a lot of different things. I think climate control or climate change is a big one. So a lot of your vectors are not getting killed off in the wintertime. We have longer, warmer seasons, so that they're breeding longer. We've got bigger mosquito populations. We've got more different diverse species of mosquitoes, with the tiger mosquito coming on over from Asia. So it's just, we've got more vectors and more opportunity to spread the disease. So I think we're seeing it more, but it's not anything new. I mean, my horse, I've had him, he just turned 35, by the way, but I've had him since he was 3, and we've been vaccinating for all of the equine encephalitises. There's Venezuelan, Eastern, Western, and West Niles is kind of included in that viral encephalitis category. They're Togo viruses or Tongo viruses. So we do have vaccines for them, and the big control is controlling the vector, but also making sure our equines are vaccinated.
But you just hit it to the point, vaccination. They have to be vaccinated. You cannot skip it, right?
Not unless you want a sick horse, because it used to be, when I grew up in Tennessee, you only had to vaccinate for like the Eastern encephalitis. And over the years, like I said, the mosquito population has moved and brought the viruses with it. So now all the way up to Maine, the recommendation is that you vaccinate for all 3. So even the Venezuelan, I don't know exactly, but I think I was in college when they started recommending that we vaccinate not just for Eastern, but also for Venezuelan, and then Western was added on. And now you vaccinate for all 3 nationwide. And I'm pretty sure that's a global thing by now, especially with the horses moving, with, the horse industry, the entertainment industry, whether it's race horses or show horses, they're going all over the place. So their exposure is not limited to just what's prevalent in their area.
How about dogs and cats?
As far as I know, dogs and cats are not susceptible to it. I'm sure so viruses and bacteria typically tend to be species specific. So that's kind of a generalization and a majority. There's always exceptions to the rules. And the reason that's how it is they kind of grow together through evolution, and they develop a relationship where they know the system of their host, and then they're able to replicate and keep themselves alive. There's always that species or that individual that's so naive, they have no protections against a certain virus, and then they become susceptible, but that's not usually the host relationship. So I think you can always find exceptions, and a lot of times it has to do also with the individual or species having a predisposition to being susceptible.
So, because the reason I'm asking this is mosquito. Mosquito will actually bite a dog or a cat or any kind of animals.
Yes.
So, now
the biggest issue I think with mosquitoes we have in the dog and the cat population is heartworms. So microfilaria. So that's a parasite that's passed through them. And that has become a thing that was just a problem in the South. And now we're seeing it well above that kind of Mason-Dixon line up into including Maine.
See, and that's not in the news. So they'll be probably by next month. They'll probably be talking about it.
It's kind of happened over the years. I think we talked about this in the green room before we started, but in things have just changed, right? 30 years ago, when I was in high school, there was no such thing as a no-kill shelter, right? You had dog pounds, and unfortunately, dog pounds resulted in a lot of euthanasia. And a consequence of that is we had a lot of disease control, because most of these dogs were either running free or wild or not being taken care of, which is why they ended up in the pound. And they tended to be the ones that had the diseases. Now that we've shifted more into a rehoming model, we have more dogs that are kept in communal environments for extended period of time. And a lot of those dogs are coming in infected with diseases and having to be nursed back to health. That also then gives the opportunity and the unfortunate consequence of we're seeing more community acquired diseases, and they're being spread, and the distribution of our disease pattern is changing, because now you've got dogs in Georgia that are being shipped to Maine because there may be more resources to care for them there. But now they're taking their heartworms and their diseases with them wherever they go. So there's less of this cutoff zones that we used to have 20, 30 years ago. So we've had to change our perception of these diseases and how we control them. Now it's kind of a blanket national recommendation, where it used to be prevalence, right? We didn't have a whole lot of heartworms out west. And I still occasionally have clients come here to Arkansas and their dogs aren't on heartworm prevention. They're like, we don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, well, you need to, because your dog's gonna be dead in 3 years if you don't. So those type of things are changing.
Now you got these pets, dogs and cats and reptiles and dinosaurs, all these animals coming from different countries. It's not only from state to state. They're coming from Afghanistan. They're coming from Puerto Rico, from Mexico, and actually from here, they're shifting for example, this is an example from Georgia, they sent it to Canada. So now we're giving it problems over there in Canada, which comes back to the next that you're talking about, the transferring, is the Strep Zoo bacteria. They're closing down shelters because of the dogs getting this. They don't want to be, it's very contagious. They don't want to spread it out.
That's also one that's not very new. It's just highly, highly contagious. And again, I think that's a consequence of our new model, where unfortunately these animals are having to stay in group environments. I think the best solution to that is probably training and education for a lot of these shelters to have a clean or a clear intake facility where these animals are isolated before they get sick and are added to general population. And then they have a chance to, again, make sure they're clean of diseases before they're adopted out into the population. I think most of our high quality, well-run shelters are doing that. But often what we run into is some of our smaller shelters have a big heart and a big goal to help these animals. They just don't necessarily understand or have enough knowledge about protecting from community acquired diseases and making sure that you have dogs that are the new incoming dogs are isolated the right appropriate amount of time. We're checking and looking for early detection of infections and testing and clearing before we're adding to the population, and then double checking before we're putting them out into the world. We had a flush of flu come through here last year, and it all came back to a shelter that several smaller shelters had gone there to take dogs out of a bigger shelter in Carolina, and I don't even remember if it was south or north, but they all kind of went to the same place. It was a shelter that had kind of gotten overwhelmed, and they were taking dogs out of that shelter and bringing them to smaller shelters here in Arkansas, and we had a ton of influenza because of that. And again, that's not having the right kind of isolation set up when you bring new members into a population before you add them into your existing population.
Is there any vaccine for the Strep Zoo?
Not that I know of, but I could be wrong. I do mostly emergency medicine, so I can be wrong on some of the GP things that have changed.
No, I heard there wasn't. That's why I'm asking. I mean,
I don't know of one.
So how can you prevent this for your pet to get it? I mean, it's only on dogs, or?
As far as I know, it's only dogs. It's like us getting strep too, right? But it's really managing. The sick ones need to be isolated until they're cleared, and then, because at least it does have antibacterial options. Like, we can treat it. It's not like a virus. So.
Wow. Then, before that, I was going to ask you about the mosquitoes. People would be worried that the dogs would get triple E and cats and whatever. But there's if you want to put spray in the dog from the mosquito sprays or the cat, it's not the one they use at home, right? It's got to be a spray.
No, I wouldn't spray them with off. So a lot of your flea and tick repellents also repel mosquitoes, especially for cats. Things like Revolution has a mosquito repellent in it. Dogs is a little harder. Off the top of my head, Bravecto, maybe. I mean, I'd have to look. Like, again, I don't do general practice, so I'm not, other than I use Bravecto in my dogs, but that's just because convenience. I can't remember every month, so I do it every 3 months. But a lot of it's just environmental control too. Like, we have a pond out back, and so we struggle with mosquitoes. You get the mosquito baits. You can put them in there. It'll kill the larvae. It's a safe bacteria because my dogs drink out of the pond too. So it kills the mosquitoes. I don't have to worry about it poisoning my fish or my turtles or my dogs, but it kills the mosquito larvae. We also added Gabesia, I think they're called, and minnows to our pond because they'll eat mosquito larvae. So there's natural things you can do. There's also mosquito baits. You can make sure you don't have stagnant water. We have a filter and a waterfall in ours to keep the water moving because mosquitoes don't like moving water. So there are things you can do in your environment to lower your risk of having mosquitoes. Obviously, you can't get rid of all of them. Not letting your dog out at dusk and dawn because that's when mosquitoes are most active. Even other natural things you can do is plant flowers that attract dragonflies because they like to eat mosquitoes too. Get a bat house. Bats love to eat mosquitoes. There's things you can do naturally. I think some of the flea and tick preventions for dogs also repel mosquitoes. But again, we're talking about repel, not prevent. So there's nothing that absolutely prevents anybody from getting bit unless you take a bath and DEET. But definitely don't recommend you doing that to your dogs. But so we are still talking about repel versus prevention. So when you start talking about lowering risk, layering the things you do to consistently lower those risks are important. You can't just rely on one thing. So yes, put Revolution on your cat. Maybe don't let them go outside because they like to kill songbirds anyway, but that's just my soapbox. But if he's going to be an indoor-outdoor kitty, obviously Revolution, maybe keep him in during night and don't let him out until after dawn, so he's less susceptible to mosquito bites. And then do all the environmental things around the house. I would just layer it. You can't just rely on one thing.
True. And that I've been saying this for a long time. I mean, so many things you could get out of animals unattended outside. They're very curious. And, we're talking about predators and all that stuff, but we also got to talk about bacteria and viruses that could take also. And now that you mentioned about cats going outside and killing birds, because that's what they do. They're predators. The bird flu virus is coming up now. They're saying that the cats, I guess it's a food chain reaction, I guess. I don't know what it is. What's going on with that?
Well, and that's the same for humans, right? It's contact with any infected bird. So bird flu is huge and very impactful in our food animal industry. You get bird flu that goes through a chicken coop, that can send Tyson very close to numbers they don't want to see. It can also drive up our food prices. A lot of times they have to do mass exterminations to get the viruses under control. Just because they spread so fast, it's hard to get it out of the population. Wild birds obviously can get bird flu too. That's a big issue with a lot of our large chicken farms is they can either wild birds can bring the disease into a clean chicken farm, or if the chicken farm gets infected, they can spread it to wild birds. And then farmers that are farming these birds become exposed and infected either directly from the bird or from the contaminated environment. And then also animals that are predating the birds are then susceptible. And yes, namely cats. I don't know how, pigs too. Pigs and cats are the ones I know that have been documented to actually get sick and significantly sick from the bird flu. I don't think cats as much. And then obviously humans have been exposed as well, or susceptible.
And what can we do to prevent it? I know it's a dumb question in a way, but
So that's a harder one because it's a virus, and not only is it a virus, but influenza is a retrovirus. So we talk about getting the flu vaccine. Everybody's like, why would I get the flu vaccine? It doesn't work. It is a prediction, right? So we have a ton of really smart people all across the world at the CDC, at Erasmus MC. There's probably a bunch of them. I don't want to leave anybody out, but they spend their lives predicting how these viruses tend to mutate and what the next mutation is going to be based on all the different pressures in the different areas. And they're always scanning and surveilling to see what comes. I think the last one was H1 or N1H5 or H1N5, forget how they name them. But it is a prediction, unfortunately, because we don't know, mutations are random. So we don't actually know how it's going to mutate. So the idea is they have a bunch of algorithms that predict what's the most likely random mutation that's going to happen, and is that going to change the effectiveness of the flu vaccine? And then you go get your flu vaccine. There's more than one flu vaccine. Obviously, we have swine flu, we have bird flu, we have just regular influenza. So predicting and being accurate every year, I think, is an unrealistic expectation. It is better than nothing, right? And there should be at least some cross protection, meaning you may get sick, even though you've been vaccinated, you may just not die, right? So the two things that vaccines accomplish, or we try to do three, but we don't always get all three. One, we want to prevent the spread if we can. Not all viruses will prevent bacteria not all vaccines will prevent the organism from replicating and spreading, but that is ultimately a goal of a vaccine. The other one is to prevent the person who is infected from getting sick. So ramping up your immune system so that even if you are exposed to the organism, you already have antibodies and protective components in place with your immune system to protect you from that organism, and you don't actually get sick from it. And the third thing was what we want to do is, if we can't do those first two things, we can at least lower their morbidity, meaning how severe is that organism going to affect my body. And we see that a lot with COVID, right? You may still get COVID, but we saw a lot less significant disease and a lot less people dying with the vaccine. So I think that is a big management of expectations. People hear the word vaccine and think, we're going to eradicate this disease and we're never going to get sick. That's not actually what every vaccine accomplishes. Sometimes we just don't want to get too sick, right? So sometimes the minimal advantage of a vaccine is that you have enough immunity that you at least have lower what we call morbidity or severity of the disease, and hopefully you were lowering that death rate.
So it's definitely that there is a vaccine for bird flu.
Again, that is a food industry disease. I don't think so. Okay. Typically, when we get like Newcastle's or bird flu, the mechanism of action, I know people don't want to hear it, is eradication. So they usually go in and kill the infected animals.
So the best thing to do is don't keep your pets unattended. Leave your cat in the house. Don't let them roam around.
I'm a big proponent for that because I work in the ER. I see the cats coming in that have been attacked by something, hit by something, fell out of something. Mm-hmm. And they are the number one killer of songbirds. There are plenty of things you can do in your house to keep your cats happy and safe. There are many cat diseases we can't protect them from. FIP, HIV, those are, so that feline infectious peritonitis is still a death sentence. I know there's a new drug out there that's not FDA approved that we've been getting really good results from, but it is far from being a cure or, giving these cats anything close to back to their normal life. And the best way to prevent those is keep them inside so they're not fighting and spreading disease.
There's one thing I want to mention that has nothing to do with this part, but we're talking about vaccines and how important it is, and it's rabies. And the reason why I bring it up is I had once had a case. A lady, she had a dog, right? A big dog, probably a shepherd. And the dog ran off. Got a missing dog. That's what they called me for. And when I went and I spoke to her, she told me that the dog does not have his rabies shots. I said, but why? You got to give the rabies shots. Yeah, but I never thought the dog never leaves the house. I said, well, it's gone now. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And we do have wildlife that do have rabies. We hear it all the time in New York City. A skunk with rabies, a raccoon with rabies. And if this, bats, and if this dog gets bitten, it's not protected.
Correct. It's also illegal. So the federal government is the one vaccine the federal government regulates is rabies. And it's mostly because of human health. That's their driving force. But also a healthy animal population equals a healthy human population. And one part of the rabies story that people don't realize is you have a dog that's not vaccinated, either never been vaccinated or not up to date in vaccines. And up to date is within the last 3 years. Or cats. Cats are a big one, right? Most people, my cat never goes outside. I can't get him to the vet. No vaccines. Cat gets sick, comes into the ER. Cat bites one of my employees. Federal government says I have to kill your cat, cut its head off, and send it off to the lab to prove it doesn't have rabies. Yes, it's the only way to test for rabies. So I tell people all the time, at minimum, if you don't want your pet to have to, and I've had to do that more times than I ever want to remember, at least vaccinate for rabies. As a kitten, as a puppy, every 3 years is minimum required. It's a $10 vaccine. You go to the vaccine clinics. At minimum, if your pet ever bites somebody, you can avoid them being euthanized.
There's dogs and cats.
That is dogs and cats, yes.
And people have domestic animals, that exotic animals that probably needs vaccines and they don't do it because they're afraid to bring it out or they think they don't need it.
So exotic animal regulations are a little different. Like I have 2 possums. They're legal here in Arkansas and they're everywhere. And these are abandoned babies. So we actually don't have to vaccinate them for rabies. Possums have a really strong immune system and harbor almost no diseases, except for a parasite here or there. But raccoons, on the other hand, they are susceptible to dog and cat diseases. So not only do you need rabies, you need all the dog series and all the cat series. So understanding what species you have and knowing, one, from a legal perspective, in your state, are you legally allowed to have that animal? And if you are, what is the state regulations on vaccines? If you're keeping something you're not legally allowed to have out of a moral obligation to that animal's health and welfare, I would at least do some investigation. Zoos are a great resource. You don't have to tell them you have an animal. Just ask, like, what are they susceptible to? I love, this is one of my little pet peeves. Everybody wants to call and ask me every basic question, which I am more than happy to be a plethora of information. But then these are the same people that go out and get an animal, don't educate themselves on anything, end up in a bad situation that either costs a lot of money or may, or even worse, cost the animal its life. But then they know every Kobe Bryant stat, the day he was born, what color the weather was, because they stay on Google and they overinform themselves about things that aren't important, but then they have another animal's life in their hands and they can't, at minimum, go on Google and find good sources. Spruce Vet is a great resource. It's kind of like our version of Mayo Clinic. Cornell University has a lot of information that you can Google, just basic information about diseases and all sorts of things. There are tons of vet, like previewed, peer-reviewed information out there that you can collect. Stay away from the forums, stay away from the breeders and all their opinions. They are not qualified. Facebook. It's like you getting, right, stay away from Facebook. Unless you know the person's personal qualifications, and I'm sorry, owning a pet for 20 years is not a qualification. They have any kind of, licensed CVTs, great resources, most of them. They've been in the industry, they have medical knowledge, they have basic understanding of things that need to be done for husbandry. But even me as a veterinarian, and I have exotic experience, I've specialized in elephants and rhinos for years. However, when I found a river cooter, which is a turtle, an aquatic turtle, in the road that got hit by a car, first thing I did was call my colleague at the zoo to say, hey, how do I anesthetize this thing, right? Because that's not something I do every day. So you can't just take any knowledge that you find on the internet, but there's plenty of resources. A lot of these vets, you can also call them, right? But there's plenty of information out there to self-educate and get good quality information, and not just believe every forum or every random person that told you something. You wouldn't do that for your kids. You wouldn't do that for your sick mother in the hospital, and you shouldn't do it for your pets.
Because the reason why I asked about exotic is because I don't know if it's an animal, but upstate they found somebody had the sloth flu.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm thinking about the first thing is that animal, which in a way it is kind of poisonous. If it bites you, there's so much bacteria.
The
So
sloth?
Well, that's what I saw in YouTube. But yeah, but the sloth. I mean, what is sloth flu?
I don't know. So I mean, anything that says flu tells me it's influenza. So I would think it's a virus. And then I would have to look up what its susceptibility is outside its species. Is it like the bird flu? And it's just in a sloth, so they call it sloth flu. We have a lot of diseases out there that are misnamed, like chicken pox is not a pox virus. So I would honestly have to do some investigation on that one. I haven't heard. I love sloths.
Only one case. There's only one case. It came out like very quietly in the newspaper, and it said sloth flu. I said, who will have a sloth upstate? But it's in New York. They had tigers in the projects. You know what I mean? So I mean, but this is how they bring all these viruses and everything, right? And bacteria, because they're taking exotic animals and they're bringing here even dogs and cats from different countries and bring it here, or we bring it over there. And it's like changing, like you said, the environment of that area, right?
Yeah. So I looked it up.
I was going to say, you're looking up the sloth flu now.
Yes. And it says it's another mosquito-borne disease. It's similar to dengue fever, like Zika virus, malaria. Those are all in the same category. And it's a flu-like fever in infected people, along with headaches, muscle aches, stiffness. I don't know that it actually comes from a sloth. They just may call it that. Hold on, let me see. I'm on the CDC.
So then the mosquitoes are the most dangerous animals on Earth. That brings all these viruses and sickness.
They are a big vector, yes. Mosquitoes, sandflies, ticks, fleas, they all love, the plague is all flea-driven disease. I don't think it comes from fleas. I mean, I don't think it comes from sloths. I think they just call it the sloth virus. Maybe it makes you really
like me.
Maybe it makes you sloth-like, but it doesn't sound like it comes from a sloth.
I mean, I think about an animal that's going like -5 miles an hour, very slow animal.
Pouch of infection. Yeah. It's like Zika. It actually causes microencephalitis if you are pregnant when you get infected.
There's a lot of diseases out there.
Okay, here it is. The first wild animal found to carry the virus were the howler monkeys in 1960, and then it was isolated in the pale-throated sloth in Brazil. So it is from animals. The main host of the virus is yet to be identified. So those are not the main host either. Primates and three-toed sloths have been found to carry it, but they don't seem to be the primary host.
Huh.
So there's
outside disease. Well,
but that person could have just gone to Brazil. Doesn't necessarily have to illegally have it.
All right.
Yes.
So let's wrap this up. It's very informative. Hey, people, please listen to this, share it with others. You want to know what's going on. You hear it in the newspaper, but you don't get a lot of information as you did with Catherine. So please watch this show. Thank you very much. And people, please spay and neuter your pets. And do you know where your pets are?